Welcome to the story of Ruth, as told in the Bible in the Book of Ruth, one of the most charming and shortest books of the Old Testament. Let's begin with an opening prayer. This opening prayer is from the Old Testament. It's a prayer that God gave to Moses. I've made just one tiny change in the wording. I've changed you to us. May the Lord bless us and keep us. May he let his face shine upon us and be gracious to us. May the Lord look upon us kindly and give us peace. Today, as we tell this story, let's also remember Ron Broussard's brother, Mark, who died unexpectedly just the day before I gave this presentation to our Bible study class. Mark was Ron's younger brother. Now, let's talk about Ruth. Many of you have read the Book of Ruth. It's very short. There have been movies and a song based on the Book of Ruth. I'm going to try to add a few new twists, focusing on some curiosities in the book, but let's begin with the time period. This story happened about 1100 BC, about 100 years before the time of King David. The book was probably not put into writing until 800 or 900 years after the events actually happened, which means that with this story, as with many others in the Old Testament, some of the little details may have been lost in the passing of word of mouth from generation to generation before things got written down. Please understand that it's the essence of the story that's important, not the little details. The story begins, interestingly enough, in Bethlehem. We've heard of Bethlehem before, haven't we? Somebody very important was born in Bethlehem. And then it moves to Moab, which is currently the territory mainly occupying the kingdom of Jordan in modern day, a little bit to the east of Israel. And then it returns to Bethlehem, and we'll see how that works out. To understand the characters in the story is a way to understand the story itself. First of all, we have a husband and wife, Naomi and Elimelech. They are residents of Judah, living in Bethlehem. They have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they have a farm. However, a drought in Judah brings about a famine, and they have to leave because they can't grow food. So, Naomi and Elimelech take their family and they move to Moab, which is a place that is historically not friendly towards Jews. However, they're able to survive there for a time. Their two sons marry Moabite women. The older son, Mahlon, marries Ruth, and the younger son, Chilion, marries Orpah. And by the way, I have not misspelled Orpah's name. Yeah, you probably know of a celebrity who has a similar name, but Naomi's daughter-in-law was named Orpah. There's another person in the story named Boaz, and we'll hear about him later, along with an unnamed person who was a close relative of Elimelech. So that's the setting and the cast of characters. By the way, there's a festival that is celebrated even today in the Jewish community that relates to the story of Ruth. And part of the celebration includes a reading of the Book of Ruth. This is the festival of Shavuot, which celebrates the beginning of the wheat harvest, and also the giving by God of the Ten Commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai. The festival extends over 2 days in spring, with a memorial on the third day. The next dates of this will be May 21st to 23rd, 2026. The Book of Ruth, unlike some of the other books which I'll talk about, is widely accepted by the Jewish community, also the Protestant Bible and the Catholic Bible. While some of the small details might be fuzzy, it is accepted by all as a true story. So let's get into it. Okay, so Naomi and Elimelech have gone to Moab, and their two sons have married two Moabite women. The family now numbers 3 women and 3 men. I don't know how this happened, but during their stay in Moab, Elimelech dies, Mahlon dies, and Chilion die. The Book of Ruth does not tell us how they died. Was it a natural death? An accident? 3 separate events? We really don't know. But it does seem odd that all 3 men, 3 husbands, all died. We're free to speculate how. This left Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah all widows. The only good news is that by this time, weather patterns had changed and the drought was not existent anymore in Bethlehem. Naomi, the older widow, could now move back to the place that she came from and hope for support from other members of her family. Unfortunately, women and older widows especially could not hope for much in those days. They could not own land or operate a farm. They could not have money independently. Naomi would have a hard time. However, it would be even harder for her if she stayed in Moab, where she had nothing at all. Naomi realized it would be better for her 2 daughters-in-law if they stayed in Moab and sought support from their own Moabite people. Her advice to them and their response is one of the most touching passages in the Old Testament. You can find it in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 to 8. Let me give you a brief reading of that, an abbreviation to the text. This will be Naomi speaking to Ruth and Orpah. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. These words spoken by Ruth have been well remembered in song. I can't go past this point without giving you a moment of Perry Como.
Whither thou goest, I will go. Wherever thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people will be my people, my love. Whither thou goest, I will go.
Such a familiar song. Ruth's love and affection and loyalty to Naomi makes this a compelling story. But before we proceed to the next part about the other daughter, let's talk about the other daughter-in-law, Orpah. Orpah decided to stay in Moab. There are good reasons why she might have made that decision. You're free to speculate. You don't have to presume that Orpah was abandoning her mother-in-law. Did she have such a strong family in Moab that she could not leave them? That's possible. Was she afraid to go to Bethlehem because she would be shunned there? That's possible. Since Ruth decided to go with Naomi, we can take that not only as a show of loyalty and love for Ruth, but also as a show of courage, because Ruth had no family in Israel or Judah, yet would face an unknown land bravely. So, now, what happens when Naomi and Ruth get to Bethlehem? Well, they found that the only way a widow could survive would be to find a farmer who permitted them to glean in his field at harvest time. That is, to go into his field after it's been harvested and pick up whatever has been left behind. It's a hard way to get food, but it will have to do, if you don't have much money to buy food. Naomi was too old to do much gleaning, so the young Ruth gathered food for both of them. Naomi remembered, though, that a relative of Elimelech had a large farm and was wealthy, and he would probably permit Ruth to glean. His name was Boaz. Naomi talked to him, and he gave permission for Ruth to go into his wheat field behind his harvesters and to gather whatever she could. While Ruth was in Boaz's wheat field, Boaz came out to inspect how all the work was getting along, and he spotted Ruth. No, he didn't just spot Ruth. He was dazzled by Ruth. She was beautiful, and he remembered from his talk with Naomi that she was a young widow of Elimelech's older son. Knowing that, he spoke to his harvesters, and he instructed them to leave large quantities of wheat behind in the places that this young woman would go. Ruth wound up bringing all the wheat she could carry back to Naomi. She came back the next day to glean again, and she found even more wheat there for her to take. Boaz watched her carefully. He had done some homework about Ruth. He approached Ruth while she was gleaning, and she fell down before him. The rest of this is a good story, is reported in the Book of Ruth. I'm going to read from Ruth chapter 2, verses 10 to 13. This will be a section where Ruth is speaking to Boaz. Casting herself prostrate upon the ground, she said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told for me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for all your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." No, Ruth was not one of Boaz's servants. Suddenly she was more. Boaz was a good bit older than Ruth, but he was unmarried, and he was smitten. Ruth was also smitten. They had some close time together in Boaz's wheat fields and in his barn, and it led Boaz to do further research on Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. There were some funny property laws back then. Elimelech had owned a farm when he lived in Bethlehem, and the farm was still considered his property, even though he was deceased. According to the law, Elimelech's heir should inherit the farm, or if he had no current heir, then his closest relative could acquire the farm temporarily. Or if the closest relative did not accept it, the next closest relative would have the option, and the next after that, and so forth. Now, why might the closest relative not take the farm? Well, there was a catch. First, acquiring the farm meant also acquiring the responsibility for Elimelech's family. The new owner would be required to care for Naomi and also to do whatever it took to find or produce an heir for Elimelech. Elimelech's oldest son should have inherited the farm, but of course both of Elimelech's sons were dead and neither one had any offspring. However, Elimelech's oldest son Mahlon had left a wife, namely Ruth. Any male child that was born to Ruth would be Mahlon's heir, and therefore Elimelech's heir, and therefore the next owner of the farm. Got it? The close relative who acquired the farm would also acquire Ruth, which meant he would have to accept her as a wife and try to have a child with her. That child would not only acquire Elimelech's land, but would also be an heir to anything else that the closest relative owned. All this would have been just fine with Boaz, because he loved Ruth and very much wanted to marry her. However, Boaz was not the closest relative to Elimelech. There was another person who was closer. Fortunately, Boaz had some pretty good skills at negotiating. He took aside the person who was the closest relative and convinced him not to acquire Elimelech's land. The key part of the argument was that if this person had a child with Ruth, that child would acquire a share of the inheritance that was previously reserved for that person's other children. The negotiation worked. The closest relative relinquished his claim, and Boaz was able to acquire the farm and acquire Ruth. He would be delighted to have a child with Ruth. The ending of this story is well told in the Bible in Ruth chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. So here goes on that reading. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. There's a postscript to this story. The child that was born to Ruth and Boaz, namely Obed, grew up and became the father of a son named Jesse. Jesse became the father of King David, and through David's line, Jesus was born. Just a couple of other points to take from the story of Ruth. Besides that she was a great grandmother of Jesus. One, Jesus did not come into this world only to save the Jews. One of his great grandparents was Ruth, and she was a Moabite. Two, although Boaz was considerably older than Ruth, he loved her and cared for her, even though his neighbors would have considered her a Gentile. In that sense, the relationship of Boaz to Ruth might be a tiny foretaste of the relationship of Joseph to Mary. Jesus certainly picked some good ancestors here, don't you think? And that's the story of Ruth. Thank you for coming and listening.